Hello. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening, depending on where you are. Hello, hello. Laura, it's great to see you. Who's here? Everybody's here. Greg, Nafia, Laura, Jennifer. It's so great to have you guys here. Happy Tuesday. So I have a different background today. Can you tell? I'm in sunny Florida. I'm so excited. I got super sick of the cold and the ice and the snow. So I just got in my car and I went somewhere warmer. So that's why I have this different background today. So I hope wherever you guys are, you're feeling warm. If you're not warm from the weather, I hope that you're warm on the insides from something delicious like warm tea or something like that. Anyway, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. As I mentioned to you guys in the email that I sent out to you, today I want to talk to you guys about assessments. And I would love to hear from you, what tools are you using for assessments? Do you do assessments? Let's start at the beginning. Do you do assessments? What does assessment mean to you? Right? People use different things to mean assessment. What I mean when I'm asking you about assessment is, how are you determining when you're meeting with your client what it is that you get to do with them that day? Is it predetermined based on their last session? What if it's a new client? Is it based on something that you're working on, that you're following a particular order of things? Or is it based on what they tell you that day? I'm really curious. How do you determine, how do you make an assessment about what you're going to work on a day when you're with a client? Is it based on something they tell you, or is it something that you've already predetermined from before that? So type that in for me in the chat and let me know what you're looking at when you're creating assessments. Is it predetermined or is it something in the moment? And then I want to talk to you today about what I do in the moment with assessments. And if you're doing in the moment, cool, great, that'll serve you. And if you're not doing in the moment with assessments, maybe it will support you to do in the moment assessments, because every once in a while a predetermined plan doesn't work. Right? Your client comes in and is like, I know we were working on this thing, but this other thing happened, or I want to change courses right now. So I want to support you around assessments, and it would help me to know what you currently do with assessments. How are you assessing what you're going to work on with your client on any given day? Send me that love note in the chat, if you will. And while you guys are typing in your information, thank you in advance for doing that. I want to introduce myself to those of you who I've not met. I think everyone here I've met, although Greg, your name looks familiar and I don't see a last name. So it's possible you and I haven't met yet person to person. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Gina Schatz. I'm the developer of the Schatz Method, which is a method of work that I use with my clients clinically. I developed it clinically while I was working with folks, and it includes assessment, and it includes tools, and it includes methodology of how to get from point A to point B. Point A being where my client came in, and point B, which is where their goals are, and that goal be pain free. So I'm super excited to share all that information with you. And I also teach anatomy and physiology. So we don't have to talk about my method. We could talk about anything anatomy and physiology. Applied functional anatomy too is also what we're here to learn, because we're applying everything that we know about anatomy, no matter what you're doing. And if you're a movement practitioner or a manual practitioner, that's cool. It's all good, because I'm talking to both of you. I am both of them, so it all matters. And any questions that you have, I'm happy to answer them for you. So I'm going to riff for about 20 minutes or so about assessments, and then we can get into live Q&A, and that can be on anything. It doesn't have to be on something I talked about today. It could be a question that you came in with, something that came up in the discussion, something you're working on with a client, some anatomy question. Maybe you're in a different anatomy course and you want to know, you hit a snag, you're not sure if something's resonating. Any question goes. I'm here to answer them for you. All right, Laura, hey, thanks for sending in a chat. And for those of you who are still interested in chatting, please send me what you do with assessments so that I can know where we all are and I can start from a common ground for all of us in this conversation. So Laura says, initially a predetermined movement assessment. Cool. Since I'm moving more towards an online model, I'm still going to do check-ins and periodic assessments to see how we are progressing in areas that we need to improve. Laura, that's awesome. So for those of you, I guess a lot of us are now mobile and doing online work. I am, for sure. And I also do in-person clinic work. So there's pros and cons to both, right? There's pros and cons to everything. There's pros and cons to both. Have you, for those of you who've moved from in-person work to online work, have you experienced a difference in what you're able to offer online? And also, Laura, as you mentioned, you're doing assessments online. Is it changing what you can assess when you're working online? For example, I ask this because there's a lot of things that we can still see with our eyes, whether someone's on camera or whether they're in person. And there's other tests and assessment tools that I use that we can easily do online. For sure, I do it when I teach practitioners. And then there's a couple things, even in my method, that if I'm not in the room with you, I can't do them. So I have to do a go around, right? Like that's a tool that I know I need and desire because I invented the tool. And if I can't do it when I'm remote with someone working online, I still want the information that that tool provides. So I've now invented a go around to do when I'm working online. So for those of you who've made the transition from working in person to online, has that changed your assessment? Has that changed the tools that you use? Has it changed the information that you get from your client? I'd love to know. This is actually really helpful to know. Just actually, Laura, you helped me realize that as you were talking, like, wow, I didn't even think about addressing that specifically in our talk today, but I certainly could. Yes, I think you have to also know how to cue and coach differently as well. Right. Yeah, we could talk about that for sure. In the mastery program, I during the pandemic, the client work that I was doing, which was all in person, shifted to all online, of course, like it did for all of us. And in that period of time, I was recording the work that I was doing online. And it is different, just as you mentioned, it's different what I'm looking for. It's different how they're hearing me. It's different what I can actually see. I can't walk around them, right? And so how do you get your clients to move? Do you ask them to move? And so because it was recorded, I asked my clients, can I use this recording to train my practitioners? And they said, yes, as long as you only use it for training purposes, yes, you can use my image. So always ask your people, by the way, for those of you working virtually, if they'll even let you record them, and then what you can do with the recordings. And so we use that recording right now because it is different. It's a different setup. You ask different questions. It's largely the same, but the differences are so distinctive that if you miss them, you make it really hard for yourself. And so we want to make this easy for us to support them, right? So we want to make it really easy. So yeah, I'm really happy you brought that up, Laura. We might not talk about that today, but we certainly could coming up. Michael and Darlene, you came in. It's nice to have you. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're talking about assessments and what tools do you guys use when you're making assessments on your work that you're going to do with a client? So do you make an assessment on what you're going to do based on what you've done previously, or do you base your assessment on what you're going to do with your client on something that you're observing? It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. I'm just really asking so I know what you're up to. What I want to share with you today is how I create assessments in the moment, like on the fly. And I've had some practitioners call me out and say, why don't you prepare? Isn't that lazy? Isn't that such and such? Like, I get it. There are some yoga teachers, for example, and some personal trainers who have the exact formula of every single thing that they're going to do with their client in that hour to make sure that they get a well-rounded movement experience. And there's some massage therapists who know exactly where they're going to start on the body and exactly where they're going to end. And that's so that they can get all the parts covered in a certain period of time. I remember being in massage therapy clinics where they had us time each limb, right? So we knew like how long it was going to take. There's magic in preparation. There's magic in preparing, absolutely. And I think once you've prepared long enough, which I know most of you, you're all seasoned, you've been at it for a long time, you're really good at what you do. That's why you're here, to get better, to find the one thing that maybe you haven't yet heard. So after a while, like me, like you don't have to memorize it anymore. You don't go on like a script, right? And it's okay if you still do. If that's where your comfort zone is, that's totally cool. I find that once we've had that script over and over again, it's like reciting your social security number. You just know it. You don't have to keep rehearsing it, So you'll kind of come into the moment a little fresher, a little more like, yeah, let's like wing it a little bit. Sometimes that's great. Winging it is great. And sometimes it gets us into trouble because we end up getting like in the weeds and we've winged it too much that now we're in the weeds and we don't even remember like where we started and we're kind of off track. And that's why I'm asking, how do you determine what your assessment is? Because we don't want to just completely wing it. We want to come in open and ready to receive information from the body and the client we're working with, and then be able to rapidly assess what that means and then apply a treatment protocol to it. And that's really the bridge, I think, in staying present, being prepared, and also still delivering amazing results. Laura says, I also conduct a health history questionnaire, so I know previous injuries, etc. Yeah, awesome. That's really helpful, right? Like getting as much information as you can before they come in. I personally don't do written questionnaires anymore because after the third client who came in and had filled out my 4 pages of information and then left out like major chunks of their history, their health history, when the 4th client did that, I was like, wait a minute. They don't want to write it all out for me. They want to talk about it. And so that actually fueled me into creating this ability to get really present in the moment and be able to come up with things like, on the fly, right? And I did that because I didn't want to waste their time coming in, and I didn't want to actually waste my time reading it just to find out I didn't have all the information. And so how could I ask questions in a way that was going to get me really potent information so I'd know exactly what to do without having any preparation going in? Laura says, yeah, you still have to have a conversation and ask probing questions. You still do, right? And so for me, I don't want to have to remember to send them the form and then read the form and then find out I have to ask the questions anyway. I'm just going to ask all the questions in the moment. So that's how I work. Doesn't mean that you have to work that way. But because I work that way, I think I have something to offer here for you to support you in what would you do if you had to ask probing questions? What questions would you ask? And what would you do with the information? All right, so let's dive in. First off, I recommend only asking questions that you know that the answer to them is going to lead you in a direction. Right? So it's almost like, imagine that you are standing at a fork in a road and you're about to ask your client a question. Rather than just asking because you're nervous and there's dead space, ask a question that it's either or. So not like you restrict them into an either or answer. That's not what I mean. But when you get the answer to the question that you've asked, it sends you in this direction or that direction. Because that's going to help get really clear so that in this pile of weeds that you're sorting through to try to find the path between them, you're going to start getting really clear on, that's my clue. That's where I'm going to head next. So when you're asking questions, ask questions that the answer gives you an either or answer. Okay, so that I recommend that. And what does that mean? Well, that means you get to prepare. Like role play with yourself. When you ask a particular question, what do you think the answer could be? And then what would you do with that answer? If what the answer could be is vanilla enough that you're not actually sure you would do anything with that answer, that's not a good question to ask, right? Hey, Michael, I'm an absolute beginner wanting a second life career. Congratulations. Very little client experience, no problem. So I'm like a fly on the wall, appreciate your material, don't want to be distracting, no reply necessary. Well, how's that for calling you right out and reading it out in the moment? Michael, it's totally cool. You're not distracting at all. You're welcome to be here. I'm so happy that you're here. In fact, I'm honored that if you're, looking at a career path and you're here with us, like what an honor for you to feel comfortable here with us. So I'm really happy that you're here. Please ask any questions, contribute to the chat. Everything you have to offer is valuable for all of us. All right, so asking questions, make sure that the question that you're asking gives you an answer that's compelling enough to send you in a direction, okay? Make sure that that's up. The other thing I would do in your assessment is make sure that you're using all of your assessment. So not only are you listening to their answers, but you're also watching them like a hawk, right? So some of you have heard me say that from the moment I meet a client in the waiting area, I'm looking at how they're sitting in the chair. They've been there for a minute or two, waiting for me to show up, right? They come a couple minutes early for their appointment. They've settled in to a posture before I ever got there. That means something to me because when they come and they sit in my space upright, that's not how they were sitting in the waiting area. So not only am I observing what they're doing when I catch them in their habit, but I'm also noticing the difference between how they are in their resting place, unwatched, unobserved, and how they're presenting when they're with me. And that doesn't mean that I'm catching them being inauthentic. I've had clients or practitioners say that that's what they think their client's doing. You guys, if you have that opinion about your client, take a vacation day, okay? Because they're not inauthentic. They're here to have support. In order to have the support that they need, we have to be wildly compassionate, which means recognizing that they know that there's a difference and they're trying really hard. And when left to their own devices, they're not reaching that. So why? Why aren't they reaching that? Is it that they don't have enough training from you? Is it that they are in pain and they don't want to admit it? Is that they don't think that there's actually any benefit in doing it differently and they just want to not be like hackled from you when they get into their next appointment with you? Because if they don't think there's any benefit in doing it, guess what? It's not about them being lazy. It's that you get to message it more clearly. You get to enroll them in the benefit of what you're asking them to do. And if you can enroll them in why they would bother, they probably will. And that's a conversation on messaging, which we've talked about and we will continue to talk about. So I watch my clients from the moment I catch them, right, when I'm not looking, when they don't think I'm looking, and then notice any differences and discrepancies. And I also watch them walk. So I, pick them up in the waiting area and I watch them walk to the treatment setting. What does their gait look like? And if I can catch them getting out of their car and watch them getting out of their car and what they do when they're, schlepping all their stuff, especially in the wintertime when they're, loaded down with extra padding and things, and when they're shuddering from the cold, it tells me a lot about what their body does when they're in survival mode, which sometimes they are, especially if that's their lifestyle. If their lifestyle is survival mode, if they're not in, an easy retirement, for example, their body is probably going to reflect their internal state. And so that means something to me. I'm using my visual assessment to glean more information about how they're in relationship with their body, even before I start visually assessing whether they're in hyperextension of the hip using glute max, right? Which again, is also part of visual assessment. So there's a lot of visual assessment that I use as assessment that's going to give me right there in the moment information. Today, how are they showing up today? Not maybe how they were last week, but what's up with them today? In addition to visual assessment, I also recommend that you use the auditory assessment, which we talked about, and then any tools that you use. So we talked last week about a little bit about the difference between tools and a method. They're wildly different, right? So tools are like having a hammer and a screwdriver and a wrench in a toolbox, right? And which tool you use depends on what outcome you're working towards. So I would love to hear from you all. What tools do you have? I know you all are very seasoned, so you've been at this for a while, and you probably have a overflowing toolbox of tools. So what tools do you use in your practice? Please share that with me in the chat. I would just love to know what you're up to. Just generally speaking, I would love to know what you're up to. I'd love to get to know you more and how you work. Hey, Mary, I'm glad you're here. Welcome. And I'd also love to know, how do you assess in the moment with your client which of those tools you're going to use? Based on what? And the reason I offer that as our third consideration when we're doing in the moment assessments is that sometimes, like me, this is what I did. I would go to a continuing education program and I would learn a tool or two or three. And they were amazing when we were all working on each other, right? And I would get a lot of experience, and there's always some kinesthetic and practice time when you're working in person, continuing education. Oh, hello. Oh gosh. Welcome. I want to try to pronounce your name. Is it Heloisa? Did I pronounce that correctly? I know you and I have been chatting.
Heloisa.
Heloisa. It's beautiful. I'm so glad you corrected me. Thank you, Heloisa. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm happy to see your face too. I've seen your name a few times as we've been chatting online. All right, so when we use tools, what's what I was finding my way back to what I was saying. When I would find a tool that worked and worked really well, like in a continuing education environment, I would take that tool back. You probably might do this too. I would take that tool back to my clinic setting and then I would like run with it, and then I'd find that like, 40, 50, 60% of my clients actually enjoyed it and then got something out of it. And then maybe there was a percentage of people where that tool didn't work. Because even if you have an amazing hammer, it's not the tool for everything you need, right? And so there's no ding on tools that work or don't work, but they don't always work for every job. And so that leads me to, when you use a tool in your toolbox, and again, guys, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What are the tools that you use? I would love to know what tools you use in your practice. When you're using your tools, when you're headed toward your toolbox to pull out a tool to use with your client in that moment, how are you choosing that tool? Based on what? Is it like, fingers crossed, I hope this works because it worked for the last two people? Or is there something in the assessment? Is there something in the information you're getting from your client in that moment where you can tie what you're observing to the results that a tool delivers when you administer it? If that's what's happening for you, it makes it a lot easier to do in the moment assessments and come up with treatment plans without having to plan ahead or feel like you're getting, derailed when your client comes in and they're not responding to what you're doing. Even if you want to continue to have predetermined treatment plans or whatever your program is that you're working on someone, I'm using treatment plans as a general comment, a general phrase to say, this is the work that I'm doing. This is my treatment. And here's my plan. Here's my protocol. Here's the class I'm going to teach. It's all the same, right? I'm just interchangeable terms here. So let's say, for example, you're teaching a class or you're working with someone as a personal trainer, and suddenly they can't do what you've asked them to do. And it says in your predetermined plan, what are you going to do? Cancel? Class is over? Sorry, go home? No, you're not going to do that. You're going to wing it. You're going to try to figure out something. How do you figure that out? What's your go-to, and why do you come up with that? If you can reverse engineer the answer to that question, you would gain a whole lot more use out of the tools that you're bringing to the table, because you'll have a kinesthetic connection between a tool and what that tool does, and you'll be able to tie it to something that you're assessing, either visually or auditory. You will tie it to something based on, this is how this client is presenting. This is where I want them to be. And here's the tool that bridges that gap. Because this tool, when administered correctly, will actually create these results. And those results are what you're looking for. The results are on the other side of the bridge. So I'd love to hear from you. What tools do you use, and how do you know when to call on them? And I hope that you don't feel like I'm putting you under pressure. I'm not meaning to put you under pressure. I'm really just curious, because I also had to figure that out. The way I figured it out was, for example, with myofascial release. I'm trained in myofascial release, like I know a lot of you are as well. I loved it. It was great. It was like, wow, what a way to get like a deep result without having to like elbow my way in or really work hard or hurt them in the process, right? Like, for a million reasons and more, I love myofascial release. And I brought it back into my clinic setting. Like, you guys get a tool that works, you love it, you fall in love. You're like, oh my God, it's the magic tool. This is the answer. There isn't one. There is no one tool. No one hammer can do everything, right? You need a screwdriver and a wrench. But you think like, oh my God, I'm in love with this tool. And you take it back to your clinic setting. What I found in that experience was that some people were like, oh, what are you doing? Like, they were kind of annoyed by it. So even if I thought it was the right tool to get the job done, I'm also in partnership with the person I'm working with. So let's let our egos not lead us into it's my way or the highway, because I'm better than you, I'm the practitioner. And let's instead partner with the person we're working with and be like, wow, I really wanted to use myofascial release. And here's the key, because I wanted this result for them. And that tool is not resonating with that person. So how else can I get that result? When you can start piecing the results that your tools provide you, it's more about the result. You're now back in service. You're more in generosity than you are in, I'm smarter because I have practice and training and I'm the practitioner, right? Like, you don't want to ever put yourself in a situation where you feel like you're creating a disconnection with the people you're serving. At any step, you want to get more connected to them. And more connected equals, what's the result I'm looking for? Not what do I want to have? What do I want for them? That's the result we're looking at. What's in it for them is the result I'm after, not what's in it for me. I'm there as a conduit to create a result, an end game for them. So in order for me to do that, I've got to be able to identify what is the result that this tool provides me, and is that the right tool for the job? And if it's not, how else can I get that result? It might be a different tool. So, using the toolbox analogy, can I pound a nail into the wall using a wrench to hang a picture? Can I pound a nail into the wall so that I can hang a picture on it by using a blunt end of a wrench and just whack it and whack it and whack it and get the nail in the wall? Probably. Have I done it? Yeah. I've even done it with the handle on a screwdriver before if I couldn't find my hammer, right? So you can get the job done with other things. Is it the way I wanted it to be? Did I want to use the blunt end of my screwdriver handle, or did I really want my hammer? I probably wanted my hammer, but I still got the job done somewhere else. And I'm using that as a metaphor so that you can see that in both directions, if you don't have the tool that you think you need, you can still get the job done if you know the result you're looking for. And if the tool that you're really attached to using isn't what your client is responding to, you can still get the result that you're looking for if you're not attached to the tool, if you're more attached to the outcome, right? So like, what outcome do I want for this person and how am I going to get them there? Okay, so when assessing, I recommend asking questions in your intake with them, even if it's just, hey, how you doing? In the moment when they show up, ask questions that those answers will give you an either or answer. You're not locking your client into an either or answer, but the answer is going to clearly lead you in a direction. Okay. And if the answer to the question isn't going to give you that, it's not a potent enough question. Ask a better question. And you can role play that by asking the question and imagining what the answers will be. And then what would you do with that answer? Like, what would you do with the answer is really what you're asking, not even the question itself. And if you can come up with what I would do with that answer is, then great. It's an awesome question. Keep asking. Then we also want to use visual and auditory assessments and any other tools, assessment tools that you have. Like we have in my method, we have a mobility test that we run people through, and we have all sorts of tools that we use and measurements and things like that that give us information from the body that the client might not be privy to. Like a client might not know their mobility, but if I run them through this really quick test, I'll know their mobility at the end. So we use tools, assessment tools. We use visual assessment, and we use auditory assessment. The answers to their questions matter. And also what the answer, what the word choice is, right? Like what they're saying matters. And I've said this before, your clients are however many years old. They've been on the planet for however many decades. In their entire life experience, they're choosing to tell you this thing. That matters. There's a reason why their subconscious has decided to share that bit of information with you. There's no coincidence there. Especially when you hear a client say, I don't even know why I'm telling you this. Like, listen, right? Because their subconscious is telling you, right? So there's 3 of you in the room. Yeah, so there's some assessments, there's some reasons, there's some tools for assessments. Oh, and then the last thing, just as I'm recapping here, I'm doing this on the fly, by the way, guys. The last thing is, what results are you hoping for when you reach for a tool? And so that will inform you more about what tool to reach for, and also what tool to substitute if the tool that you want to use because of its result isn't the tool to be used in that moment. You can then, make a lateral shift and choose a different tool that would get you a similar result, right? There's more than one way to release fascia. We all know that. Well, maybe we don't, but there's more than one way to create an outcome is what I meant to say. I don't mean to be making any comments that make people feel uncomfortable at all. In fact, I want to do the opposite. I want to bring you into the conversation. So speaking of, how was that? Did that serve you? Does that help you understand more about how you would address an assessment and come up with a plan in the moment? Because that's exactly how I work, right? I mean, there's a couple other things, of course, that I'll add in, but I don't come up with predetermined treatment plans anymore. Even when I have someone on a trajectory to get them to a particular outcome, I still every time just in the moment, like I haven't seen them before. And I go through my routine and get the information that I need. I listen to what they're saying. I listen to what their experience was last time. I listen to what their body's saying. And then boom, that's what we're on to that day. Always keeping in mind the goal that I'm heading them towards. So I don't want to think I'm driving to Florida and then halfway in between notice a really pretty sign and then head off into Cincinnati. Like I don't want to do that, right? So you always keep your end goal in mind. So yeah, so I'm hoping that served you. Did that serve you? Did that serve you? Is this the way you guys do assessments? The chat's been a little bit quiet. So I just want to make sure that this is serving you and that we're talking about something that will actually give you some support as you're doing amazing work with your clients this year. How is that? Anybody? Anybody? All right, so now we're at the half of the hour. So if there's no questions on assessments or no other information about assessments, that's okay. We can move on. Let's move on. What questions do you have today? How can I support you further? If you would like to ask a question, you're welcome to come off camera or off mute. And if neither of those appeals to you, you're welcome to use the chat. I will answer every question that comes in on the chat. And I'd love to serve you. So please tell me, how can I? What's come up for you today? Why are you here? What were you hoping for today? Did I meet it yet? Can I still have an opportunity to meet it? What are you up to and how can I serve you? Any question on the table is all fair game. Oh, you guys are quiet today.
Hey, Gina, can you
Hey,
clarify?
Laura.
I guess, I don't know. I guess, can you clarify what you mean by tool? I don't know. That sounds like a weird question, but like, when I think of, are you talking about like a tool as in like something like tangible? Or are you talking about more like a tool as in like a movement pattern or an exercise or something like that? Or both? I don't know. I guess I'm a little like, just wanting a little more clarity around that, if that's cool.
Yeah, it's totally cool. And thanks for asking, because you're probably not the only one that has that question. So it wouldn't help me to give you that as a tip to do if you don't know what the frig I'm talking about. So thank you for the opportunity for me to clear that up. I love it. Yeah. So I'm hesitating for a second because I've had this conversation a few times recently. And so I want to make sure I give the most direct answer. When I was asked the question, around technique versus method, from that conversation, tools came up. So you can have a technique, like a way that you do something, and sometimes techniques are tools. You can also have a method of doing something, a methodology that is also loaded with tools. So like, what's the difference between tool and method and methodology? I'm going to just answer your question though, Laura, and here's what I mean by tool. If I am trying to get a job done, if I'm trying to accomplish a task, I'm going to use something to get that task done. So for example, I'll use something different than a toolbox just in case it lands a little bit differently. If I want to send a message to someone, I'm going to open up my email and send them an email. But if I know that that person doesn't respond to email well, or their email is always really full, or I have two different email addresses for them and I'm not sure how I'm going to get the message to them directly without maybe it getting lost in one email address, or maybe I had the wrong address, but I really want to get a message to them now, I'll pick up my phone and call them or send them a text message. I'll use a different tool to get the task done, which is to give them a message. So let's say, for example, a client has quote unquote tight hamstrings. And you know, I don't love that phrase, but let's just say they have tight hamstrings. I have to determine in my assessment what's causing the tightness, and then what do I do about it? So there's 4 different types of tightness. If it's under contractile stress, I'm going to do something to lengthen those fibers. Stretching might be it, working the lever system might be it, PNF might be it, right? Those 3 things are tools to accomplish the goal of getting rid of contractile tightness. Cool, awesome, thumbs up. Thank you, Laura. And so I have lots of different tools to get the job done. I have to determine what the job is and what my outcome is that I'm looking for, and then apply the right tool. So I'm hoping that that answers it for the rest of you as well. Yeah, you're nodding, Halisa. Awesome, thanks. Awesome. Okay, great. So you guys probably have, if you haven't considered it in the framework of like, what are the tools that I use, you're probably loaded with tools. You probably have a ton of them. And so I find it really helpful, and I train my practitioners in my training program this, really get clear, like get very identified with the tools that you have. Not so that you can laundry list yourself, but because of what I shared in our talk today. What do they produce? What results do those tools produce? Because if I'm connected to the results that they produce, I'm connected to the results that I produce, which means that I'm Johnny on the spot when it comes to getting my client their end result. Even if the first tool didn't land and I get to pivot a little bit. Maybe stretching isn't working. I need to do PNF to get that contractile hamstring, to comply, so that then I can go on to move. Maybe they don't have tight hamstrings when they come in. Maybe you got them in downward dog and they're saying, I can't, my hamstrings are screaming. And they never said anything about their hamstrings before that moment. In order for you to continue walking them through Sun A or whatever other movement you have, or your massage for it to be comfortable, you got to do something about that tight hamstring that you didn't know about until that moment, right? So like, again, assessment on the fly is happening even when we come prepared with a plan. So I want you guys to be able to like really identify what the result is that those tools in your toolbox create for you, and then be able to call on them like that. Okay, awesome. So we have a love note in the chat. Hi, Nafia. How you doing? How can therapists determine if a person has circulation problems as well as being anemic by massage? Is it by feeling their skin being cold even after massaging? That's a great question. I'm not anemic and my hands are always cold. Why God made me a manual therapist is almost comedic. So I wouldn't say that their skin being cold or them feeling cold is necessarily a circulation problem or anemic problem, although it could be. I like the sincerity around your question, Afia. It can also be thyroid, right? Like thyroid is your internal temperature in your body. And whether it's circulation or thyroid or a blood condition like anemia, my personal opinion about that, my professional opinion about that is that it's not in our scope as massage therapists to diagnose. So I wouldn't even worry about whether you can determine it, because here's the thing: if they have a cardiovascular if they have a circulation problem and you're doing massage with them, most times, depending on the circulation problem and the type of massage that you're doing, you're helping it most times. If they're anemic, massage won't hurt them. And if it's a thyroid issue, massage won't hurt them, right? Because meaning a thyroid issue that's creating their cold hands. Because if anything, what it'll do is if you get them into a parasympathetic state, which full body relaxation massage is known for, what'll end up happening is that you'll regulate their nervous system, which then affects their hormones, and it's actually helping. And the same thing with, not enough blood in their body. Literally, you're massaging them, you are creating circulation for them on their behalf. It's not by way of their heart muscle, but you are moving fluid throughout their body, even if it's just in response to your touch. So in those three instances, my experience is that it's not going to hurt. If you do most of the time, depending on the type of massage that you're doing, it's not going to hurt them. And it's not in our scope to make that diagnosis. If there's another reason why you're asking, though, if you have a concern about someone, I highly recommend that you feel really comfortable talking to your clients about that. I can't tell, Nafia, from the chat if you are. So if I'm not speaking directly with you, forgive me. I'm kind of gleaning why you might be asking the question, and feel free to ask more in the chat if you want to do that, if that would support you. But I would recommend being really open and honest with your clients when you recognize things in a compassionate, diplomatic way. Meaning, oh my goodness, meaning, don't start throwing out potential diagnoses to people, right? Because it really creates huge fear in them. And our clients are largely used to diagnoses, and diagnoses are I am statements. We talked about this a few months ago in our training Tuesday. So we don't want to give them an I am statement that they're going to walk around with, oh, my massage therapist who I really know, like, and trust thinks that I have anemia. Like, we don't want them to leave thinking that, right? But what we can do is ask them, have you had cold skin before? Have you talked to a doctor about it? Does it affect you? Are you concerned about it? Have you had any information come to you about it? Nafia, a client asks after massage, what did I find happening with their body? How do I answer them? Okay, great. Yeah. So you want to answer them directly and be honest and open. Great. You can let them know that that you felt that their skin was cold. Just tell them exactly what you found without attaching a diagnosis to it, because you're not qualified to do that diagnosis. None of us is. So we want to stay in our lane and be honest. And I hear you that that's what you want to do. So you can say to them, well, it's interesting because, for me, for example, if I was speaking it, my hands are always cold. And I would say, it's interesting because I recognize that my hands feel cold often. And after getting through your massage, an hour later, I recognize that your skin felt cold to the touch too. Did you feel your skin was cold? Did you feel cold? It's possible they were cold and they didn't tell you they wanted a blanket. It could be that simple, right? So we don't want to like get off into crazy land, but ask them, was that your experience? Was that your experience, dear client? Did you feel coldness on your skin? And if the answer is yes, ask them, have you felt that before? And if so, what have you done about it? So get into curiosity with them about the information more than forcing yourself to give them an answer. That's actually the key takeaway here, right? We find there's so much love and open-heartedness in our industry that I find so many practitioners feel compelled to like give the answer and solve the problem. And I love that about us so much. And we can get ourselves into sticky water if we try too hard because we don't have the answer and we're not meant to have the answer. But sometimes it's kind of like, think about it like if you're ever going through something personally and you have a friend, just listen and ask, well, what are you thinking and how are you feeling about that problem? And what do you want to have happen? Like if a friend ever asks you those questions, somehow just in that share, you're like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to call that person back and tell them I'm sorry, right? Like you come to the answer yourself, or I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going back to school. I just thank you for listening because I heard myself talk and now I know what I'm going to do. Like just being heard and like creating an environment for your clients to feel really present with them can get them to, I think this is something I want to look into in my own body. And then great, then you support them in doing that. And they may even ask you for a recommendation who they should go to because it's not you, right? Like we're not in the world of diagnosing anemia. That's not our jam. So just keep in mind, guys, that you can give them movement towards an answer without having to have the answer. Take the pressure off of you. You can get to the answer together. Partner with your person, partner with your client, and ask enough probing questions, thoughtful questions, like the same way you ask questions when you're doing your own intake and assessment, so that the answer reveals something to them. And then you've helped them get to the answer. That's definitely still being in service. Oh, you're welcome, Nafia. I hope that supported. Awesome. All right, loves. And what other questions do you have? Who else has a question? I would love to support you. Anybody? It's always this moment where I'm like, is somebody typing and I just can't see them? Or is everybody waiting for me to say something else? Is class over early? Who's got a question? We can end early if you don't have any. I'm hoping that when I create ideas in your mind that it'll actually create questions for you. That's always my hope. Nafia, clients often ask what caused me to have this pain here or there. They expect a therapist to know everything related to them. They do. So here's the jam. You are expected to know more than you probably know. We all are because we chose the body as our muse. There's never going to be a time where we're going to know everything we get to know about the human body. So I believe a couple things can happen for you in a response to that question. When our clients are asking us and they expect us to know all the answers. Here's what I believe. When my client is asking me a question that is way beyond what my knowledge bank can offer, like, do you think I have anemia? Do you think I have this? Do you think I have that? It's a compliment, you guys. It is a gigantic blinking billboard compliment that they actually trust you enough and believe in you enough and have learned enough from you already that they actually think you'd have the answer. That is a gigantic compliment. So just notice what happens inside of you when that question comes up. Do you get kind of rubbed? Like, why are they asking me 50 questions? Because if that's the case, you get to look at that and calm your tushy down. Or do you get pressured because you think you're supposed to have the answer? Also, you get to look at that because you're not meant to have the answer to everything, but you are meant to acknowledge that your client really sees something in you. They trust you, which means here's the responsibility in that. Everything that you say, they will take to heart, which is why we don't want to get into diagnosing too soon because they're going to listen to you because they're already asking you stuff because they think that you have all the answers for them. And if you don't have an answer, what stops you from saying, I don't have an answer for you? Like is that it's usually ego. I mean, my experience with practitioners is it's usually ego because we don't want to say we don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. I don't know everything. And I've like let the pressure off. I've let myself off my own hook. If I don't have an answer, I don't have the freaking answer. Do I want the answer? Sure. And then I'm going to go get it. And I'm going to thank my client for asking it. And there's nothing wrong with telling your client, you know what? I don't really know, but I want to find out. So I'm going to find out and I'm going to come back to you. I'll let you know next time if that's okay with you. And usually they're like, wow, you're going to go do some research on my behalf. That's amazing. And the other thing is that if it's a musculoskeletal problem, and this is just an honest, like, just look yourselves honestly in the mirror. If it's a musculoskeletal problem and you've even said, this, you have this restriction, you have that pain, whatever, and you believe that you're supposed to have that information, you probably are supposed to have that information, in which case there's your invitation to be your integrity, right? And go back and get some training, find out, go take a CE course, enroll in a program, come back to me, ask me the question. Like, Laura, you've been so open and honest, you've hot seated yourself like 4 weeks in a row, right? With the same client, you're like trying to get you an answer. Find the answer, guys. Like, that's what we're here for. Honestly, none of us has all the answers. So if you know that you're supposed to have the answer, go get it for sure. Michael, please review from several weeks ago, intrinsic muscles, intrinsic as a source of what Aikido calls uprightness or Stanley Kellerman motility. So I don't know Stanley Kellerman motility, and I don't know what Aikido uprightness is, Michael. So I can't speak to that. However, I'm guessing, because it's a little limited of a question, I'm guessing what you're saying is that you've heard some other sources talk about intrinsic strength, maybe. I don't have enough information from your question here, but if that's the case, here's what comes to mind for me. If I didn't get any more information,
I'm going to
go ahead.
I don't want to put my video on. So you said, I think it was part of the there's no such thing as stretching talk.
Mm-hmm.
And you said there's like the most superficial muscles that you can actually see and kind of palpate. You had one word that I can't remember. That's kind of what I'm asking for, but you said deeper underneath them are like you calling intrinsic muscles that help with holding you up against gravity. And they're important, but they're not, you can't touch them.
Correct. And so your question,
I can't remember what's the name of the more voluntary muscles.
More voluntary?
Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah, isn't it? Am I even forgetting the other one called was it not intrinsic?
I don't think you're forgetting, Michael, but it sounds like there might be I'm glad you asked the question, because it sounds like there might be a couple ideas kind of blurring together. So I'd love to offer clarity. So let me take a stab at it and see if this answers your question. So stretching doesn't exist is not the conversation around intrinsic versus phasic muscles. Stretching doesn't exist.
That's what it was. That's okay. That's what it was. It's phasic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So maybe I'm misremembering which talk you introduced this, but that was the thing I couldn't remember, the phasic versus intrinsic.
Yep. Yep. Those are the.
So I guess I'll just tell you, like it's my own experience too, that when you learn to relax, what I'm going to guess are the phasic or voluntary skeletal muscles, especially if you have a lot of habitual tension due to compensating for poor posture, which I really have. And do breath work where you really do some deep relaxation. I find that there is this capacity, this natural strength that comes through and holds you up. And it's not like muscles that can do that for 20 seconds and then get too tired. There's an intrinsic or deep source of uprightness or power that will hold you up as long as you can relax and it doesn't get tired. And that's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering whether intrinsic muscles are, have that much of a dichotomy versus the what you're calling phasic muscles.
It's an interesting question. I'm exploring it while you're asking it. Off the top of my head, my instinct in the moment is leading me to think that that's not intrinsic muscles that are holding you up. And the reason is because just physics. So gravity pulls you down, and intrinsic muscles don't pull you up. But if you engage them, they will resist gravity. So it's not like they.
Okay, well, right. So you said it correctly. I didn't remember it to say it that way, but yes, I remember that's what you mean. And that's what that's what I mean. They will hold you against gravity. And that's
sorry,
what I'm trying to make that connection there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but you have to actively use them, right? It's like you have to choose to engage them, just like I have to choose to engage any muscle. If I want to move my body, I have to move my body. I have to do that. It's not gonna, my body, if I think about walking over to the door right now, my body's not gonna go do it on its own. I have to like engage them and take them over there, right? And it's the same thing with intrinsic muscles. I have to choose to, right now I'm leaning forward towards my computer screen. I have a terrible habit of doing that. I have to choose to sit upright and engage the erector spinae along my spine. I have to choose that. And when I do, I'm opposing gravity, and those muscles are getting stronger by the lifting away from gravity rather than the pumping. Like biceps is a phasic muscle that gets stronger when I add length, contract with weight bearing, because that's how phasic muscles strengthen. Intrinsic muscles strengthen when we move them away from gravity.
Great. So that's the refinement that I didn't retain from last time.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad that you asked. And I'm thinking that the lever system, which you mentioned, no, you didn't mention lever system, excuse me. You mentioned stretching.
Well, I understand it as part of the lever system, and that the idea is that there's a intrinsic, or there's a built-in signal to lengthen, and there's no such thing as a signal to stretch or something like that.
Exactly. And I love, Michael, that you just changed your wording from there is an intrinsic signal to there's a built-in signal, because that word, right, like that's the classification of that group of muscles. And when we start using intrinsic, like internal and automatic and intrinsic, then we can kind of like confuse like what muscle are we talking about. So, and they're interchangeable terms in some dialogue for sure. But I love that you made that distinction for yourself right now, because now I know that it landed for you. So that's great.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Laura, sometimes it's, you're saying sometimes it's collaborating with another practitioner and learning that way, or asking someone else that is more experienced. Yeah, exactly. There's always somebody more experienced, because we can't know it all. So every one of you is more experienced than me at some level, right? Because I don't know it all. I know what I know. My mom just said that to me the other day. She's like, boy, you really know what you know. And she didn't say it with that tone. That sounds a little snarky, but she said, you really know what you know. And it's true, right? Like it's true for all of us. What we know, we really know. And then there's a humility that comes with acknowledging, and there's so much more that I don't know. And that's really where, if we can just keep that, be really humble about it, then we'll always be improving ourselves as practitioners, because we'll be reaching for more information instead of just expecting us to default on what we know and like that's enough. Darlene, thank you. Wonderful information, but I must go back to work. Back to service. Good for you. I'm so glad you were here. It was awesome. Okay, loves. Well, it's just about 4 minutes before the end of our hour together. If there's any other quick questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can come off mute and ask super quick, or if you're typing in the chat right now, that's also great. I'm happy to answer one more question. If there isn't another question, and I'm just going to anticipate closing, but if one of you is popping up in a question in the chat right now, I will of course reroute. But if there isn't another question for today, that's also totally fine. And I want to wish you all a super great Tuesday. I'm really, really happy when you guys show up. I'm really happy when you guys show up for all the reasons we talked about. Like, we're just being really honest with ourselves and what we know and what we still get to know. And that's super amazing to know that I'm in an industry with folks who take themselves really seriously and the work that you do. So I just want to acknowledge you for that, for coming and continuing to spend your time. And I know time is money in our industry, to spend your time here, hoping that you're going to get value. And the fact that you keep coming back leads me to know that I am providing value. So it makes me feel really great as well. Nafia, thank you very much for your time. Yeah, of course. Likewise to you as well. Next week, I am traveling, and I was trying to figure out a way that I could be on Zoom and in my car and do the both and I don't think it's safe, guys. Especially because I'll be driving through a state where it's a hands-free state, right? You're shaking your heads. You're right. I had a moment of like, I could do it all. And I really want to be here with you, and it really has to be my travel time. So next Tuesday, we're not going to meet, but I promise you that we'll be meeting the week after. And I have no other travel plans. Every Tuesday, I may not be present, but I look at it on replay, Nafia. Oh, good. I'm so glad you catch it on replay. And yes, the replays are up for 2 weeks. We keep them on the YouTube channel for 2 weeks. And today's we may keep up a little bit longer, but I'll see if I can give you guys something else. I'm trying to think about what else could I give you in my absence next Tuesday, because I really don't want to miss. I want to keep pouring into you. So maybe I'll send you something. Check your inboxes. And if I can find a little treat to send you, I'll send you something that you can get some golden nuggets from for the week to satiate you. But please, as you're taking next week live off your calendar, please mark it for the week after, because I really don't want to create one of those, you miss a week and then you miss the next week and then boom, you're off the wagon. I don't want to do that to you. That's another reason I really wanted to make sure I was here next Tuesday. So promise me that 2 weeks from today, you'll come back. Bring your friends with you. By the way, if your friends aren't on the email list and they're not getting the invite, you're welcome to share the link with them. They're welcome to come and sit in on a talk and participate and get some golden nuggets too. I'd love to support anyone that you love. Mary, thank you. You're welcome. Louisa, you're welcome as well. Laura, thank you. Safety is more important. Thanks, Laura. You're right. I know, right? I get a little crazy. Like, I want what I want. I get so like stubborn. I want what I want. So you're right. I get to be safe next week. And I'm also super excited because next Tuesday I'll be traveling from one state to another, and I get to stop and see one of my mastery practitioners who's been in training with me for 9 months, and we've never seen each other in person. And I'm going to go to her house. I'm so excited. So it's actually going to be a really great practitioner day for me next Tuesday. So, and I will miss all of you, but I will see you in 2 weeks from today. Okay. Have a great Tuesday.